Hi everyone, it's Grant here. Welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to show you one significant exercise that will really help improve the flexibility of your shoulder. And if you'd like to hang around to the end of the video, we'll talk about why this is really important and how you can apply it to everyday life. But not only that, but making sure that what you can do to prevent this from becoming stiff again, which is a really powerful idea. So if you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing, leave a like. It really helps support the channel. It just helps it grow, helps these videos sort of get to more people. So the exercise that we're going to go through is a shoulder capsule exercise. Now you may have seen the hip capsule stretch that we did before. There should be a link that pops up here if you want to go watch that. It's a very similar exercise, and it takes the principles from freeing up a stiff hip joint and applies the exact same idea to a stiff shoulder joint. Now it's separate to what we often think of when we're stretching shoulders, because we often think of muscles and muscular tightness being the problem. But what that often hides essentially is that deeper than that muscular tightness is often a joint that's stiff. It just doesn't move very well, it's rusty. And a lot of the musculature over the top can also be tight, but by massaging and stretching those muscles, it doesn't necessarily guarantee that that shoulder joint can move better. It can just be stuck. And particularly with things like frozen shoulders, the stiff capsule can be the main limiting factor, the main painful structure. So if you can have a very simple exercise to free that up, then hopefully this video will help you. It's quite a brilliant exercise. So like we do with any stretch, we want a reference point to start with. So what we always recommend is simply check out your range of motion first. So again, it might be hard to see this, but with this arm, I'm just going to go up as high as I feel comfortable before I feel like my shoulder gets stiff and I have to open up my rib cage or poke my chest out to get there. So hopefully you can see this in the video. I'm just going to go to this point here. So pretty much straight up and down, which is pretty good. I don't have any shoulder dysfunction. But we want to take this position, we want to do the stretch and then compare it to the exact same test again to make sure that we see change. Now, if you remember from one of the previous videos, the hip capsule stretch was basically putting some pressure through your thigh bone and trying to imagine that it's pressing out the back corner of your hip. And we did that by trying to stay parallel to the ground. We're not sort of twisting or tilting, trying to keep everything integrated and then shifting across over that side that you're trying to stretch until you feel a bit of a pressure through this hip. Now we can do the exact same thing with the shoulder. So we have a couple of options here. So to begin with, depending on how flexible your shoulder is and how comfortable you feel on the ground here, we want to make sure that your shoulder's in a good position. So a lot of people are naturally rounded based on their postural habits and the positions they get forced into every day. So to start with, we want to make sure that those shoulder blades are relatively back. So we're not trying to sink your chest into the ground. We're basically trying to keep your trunk nice and straight, and you're basically lowering everything between those shoulder blades so it sits down a little bit lower. So for some people, it can help to push yourself away first and come back again just to get a sense of what that feels like. But ultimately, we want to be down with those shoulder blades back in a good position. The next part of this is much like we've done previously in a squatting video. We want to talk about rotating those arms into your hands. So essentially, we don't want your elbows facing out to the side. We want those elbows almost facing behind you, facing backwards, while your hands are facing straight. The front of your elbow, the inside of your elbow, sorry, should be facing forward. So without twisting your hands away, we plant your hands, twist those elbows around from a good shoulder position. So this is a nice stable shoulder shape. So similar to the hip stretch, all we're doing is basically shifting our body weight across over that shoulder, or over that hand almost, but we're not twisting towards the side. We're trying to keep our shoulders back, arms in a good position, and shifting across, looking to feel some tightness or some pressure through the back corner of your shoulder. Now, if you feel something pinching at the front, we can play around with the position, so you can come over the top of it or come back on it, looking for a position that gives you access to the back corner of that shoulder. And like any stretch, we want to hang out here. So we can stay here for 30 seconds. 40 seconds, a minute if you feel comfortable, and then we want to come back off that stretch. And then what we want to do this time is, once you've done a few rounds of that, you can stay there for as long as you feel comfortable. But what we can do here is, once you find a position that feels like it gives you good access to that tightness, we can get you to tense the muscles up around your shoulder, give them a squeeze. Ultimately, this is a capsular stretch, so you're going to feel some pressure in the back of that shoulder, but there are tight muscles for the most part for a lot of people over the top. So if you get into that position, give them a good squeeze and then relax. You might find after 5 seconds of doing that you can go a little bit further than before. Now, if this is comfortable for you and you feel like it's a little bit too easy and you need something that's a little bit harder, what we can do here is we can just drop down onto your elbows. So it looks a bit awkward of a position, but the idea with this is we're taking out the elbow joint. So instead of trying to have all the force pushing through these extra joints, you can sort of lose a little bit of that pressure if your elbows are bent or not in a good position. So we can bypass that a little bit by just dropping straight into a more bent arm position. Now, the same rule applies, shoulders back, and then coming across, trying to find that tightness, that tight spot that you feel you need access to. The beautiful thing about this position is, much like the hip where we had you in flexion, internal rotation and external rotation, excuse me, we can do the same thing with your arm position. So this internally rotated position and this externally rotated position are really important because different parts of that capsule can get stiff. Now, before we get down and show you this, the internally rotated position is a position that can cause impingement or catching at the front of the shoulder for some people. You shouldn't be getting that with this exercise. If you do, we need to modify it so that you're not putting that same pressure through to annoy it. So how that looks is, again, in this position, shoulders back, we want to rotate that arm in towards you, and what we can do here is the same thing. We're coming straight back over the top of that. If you feel like it pinches a little bit, then come up or down over the top of that just to find a position that feels better for you. So remember, we're always looking for pressure and tightness through the back of the shoulder. It should never pinch through the front. If it does, come out of that movement a little bit more, or don't wind it up as much. Now, so part 3 to this, to make this even harder again. So if you feel like that on its own didn't necessarily wasn't giving you the access that you need, wasn't giving you the results that you're after, then what we can do is we can add a power band to that stretch. So again, you may have seen these before. We'll leave a link in the description so you can check these out. You can get them from anywhere. But what we want to do is we want to add this band and have the band pulling laterally, so pulling sideways away from you to almost open up and pull open the joint so that you can bias the tightness better. So if you've seen any of our videos before, you'll understand that these bands are one of the most beneficial pieces of home exercise equipment you can have if you're looking to improve your mobility. And how it looks for this particular stretch is we just want to place the band sort of right up into your armpit as high as you feel comfortable. So whether you're in this position or in this position, we want enough tension so that when you set back up again and come back towards the band, you feel like you're not taking out the tension. So you should always feel like there's some tension there. Now, what we often find with this is that once you add the band, you may not feel the same amount of significance in terms of tightness and pressure at the back of the shoulder, but it is doing something. So again, when we do the retest in a second, you should hopefully see that there's a genuine change when we do this. So same thing, we want to hang out in this position, find the angle or the corner that works best for you. You can turn your arm in, you can turn your arm out, depending on where you feel the most tightness. This is a nice spot for me. And you can also take the other arm out of the equation. So instead of having both arms on the ground, we can have one arm essentially having all the pressure going through it. So it's such a good exercise. It doesn't take very long to do that. But the important thing here is for reference, I think my left arm was relatively straight up and down. So hopefully this speaks for itself. So what we should expect is when we do this, that arm should go further than before. So from memory, it was straight up and down. This time, without allowing my chest to move, I feel like I've gained that extra few degrees in there. So now I'm breaking that sort of 90-degree position. So as we said at the start of the video, the reason why this is such an important exercise is because it targets the joint capsule. So if you have a frozen shoulder, if you've had surgery and you feel like your shoulder's stiff and yet you go into physical therapy or physiotherapy and your physiotherapist is grabbing your shoulder and having to forcefully move it, if you're doing stick exercises where you're trying to forcefully move it, if you've got the pulley system and you're just basically trying to move it and force it to get better, all of those exercises and techniques are trying to improve the joint capsule's sort of mobility and the ability for those tissues to move effectively. So you can bypass a lot of that by doing this stretch. As you'll hopefully see if you do it yourself, by putting yourself in a position where you're putting tension through the capsule and staying there, you can make significant change in a short amount of time. So clinically for me, we used to have this idea that if someone had a frozen shoulder, that it might take 12 months to 2 years for that stiffness to subside and the pain potentially along with that. Interestingly and amazingly, by doing these stretches, we can start to take that number down from years to months to potentially weeks once we sort out all the other pain-producing structures as well. So the potential benefits from this exercise are huge. But as you can hopefully see, you don't have to have a diagnosed frozen shoulder or some post-op stiffness. If you just want your shoulder to move better, this exercise is fantastic. Now, the reason why it helps a lot of people is the reason why this gets stiff in the first place. And again, if you're following these videos, you'll know that it's really important to have an exercise to address one of your symptoms, but it's just as important to have a conversation about why that symptom is there in the first place. So stiffness doesn't just happen, it happens because of something. It's your body's response to an extra load or extra pressure or something dysfunctional that it feels it needs to reinforce to keep you going. So if you're spending your valuable time stretching those tissues, you're going to have to keep stretching those tissues unless we address this and have a conversation about this as well. And in this instance, as it is for most things, to be fair, the single biggest cause of capsular stiffness and joint stiffness in the shoulder is being stuck in poor, crappy shoulder shapes. So those same positions that we always reference where you're dropping down and you're letting your arms basically hang off your upper back and your neck. Most people get stiff through the back half of their capsule, generally because the weight of the arm consistently pulling against gravity is just tensioning up that area all the time. So the only way that we can really cure that, if that's an appropriate thing to say, is by generally getting you out of that position and sort of resetting your posture, resetting your awareness to make sure that your shoulders are back and in a good position. And if you can couple that thinking with a simple capsular stretch like this for the shoulder, then you don't deserve for that stiffness to keep coming back. And if you're someone who values shoulder function, if you're a throwing athlete, if you're a swimmer, if you use your arms and your shoulders a lot with work, it almost becomes a must do, because any of the day-to-day issues and problems that you face, you shouldn't have to keep facing. More importantly, because the capsule doesn't often, it's not often a pain-producing structure in a lot of people, it's just stiff. And if you're not looking for it, then it's hard to often find that. But as you can hopefully see, a simple exercise can make some important gains in a very short amount of time. So again, please give that a go. Give us some feedback. Let me know how that exercise went for you. Take a photo. Let me know how your range improved before and afterwards, because we want to make sure that these things are working for you, because they work for everyone else. So clinically, you just don't see too many people not benefit from this particular stretch because it's so simple and so powerful. But you need to make sure you're seeing some change yourself. So again, if you'd like to support us, please leave a like below. Consider subscribing if you're new, and please feel free to share this around. If you know someone who has been diagnosed with a frozen shoulder, or they've had surgery and they're looking to start this exercise once they're sort of past that initial healing phase and they're ready to rehab themselves, we'd appreciate you sharing that around. So again, please follow along. We're trying to get through these exercises or these videos daily. We're hopefully trying to support you through this time. So If you have any other questions, let me know. But until tomorrow, we'll see you soon. Bye.